Hundreds of people have gathered at a mosque in Doha, Qatar, for a funeral service for the slain Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh and his bodyguard. Multiple officials and religious leaders are attending the funeral. Haniyeh had lived in Qatar for many years and will be buried there. He was assassinated in what Iran says was a missile strike inside Iran on Wednesday. Speculation is now rife about who could succeed him as leader of Hamas's political wing. Now,
Whoever replaces Ismail Haniyeh as Hamas's new political leader has to decide on how the militant group will continue its fight with Israel and also represent Hamas on the world stage. The man accused of orchestrating the October 7th terror attacks on Israel, Yahya Sinwar, is considered more radical than Haniyeh. But Sinwar is believed to be hiding in the group's tunnel network beneath the Gaza Strip. And he's expected to remain the chief of Hamas in Gaza. Experts believe a more likely contender to replace Haniyeh to be this man, Khaled Mashaal, a veteran Hamas official. He was previously the leader of Hamas's political office, directing the group from exile. In 1996, he survived an Israeli assassination attempt in Jordan. Mashaal is considered more moderate, and he has good ties with Qatar and Turkey. But his relations with Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah soured over his support for the 2011 Arab Spring protests. Another possible choice to replace Haniyeh is Khalil al-Hayya, a senior Hamas leader who also lives in exile. He was the target of an Israeli assassination attempt in 2007. Al-Hayya is viewed as a powerful figure within Hamas who was close to Haniyeh. After Haniyeh's death, al-Hayya vowed to make Israel pay a heavy price. While Hamas has a record of moving quickly to replace assassinated leaders, the selection process this time will be more challenging. Many members of the group's main consultative body, the Shura Council, are in Gaza, so a full leadership meeting is unlikely.
Well, joining me here in the studio now is Daniel Gerlach. He's a Middle East expert and the editor-in-chief of Zenith magazine. Daniel, it's good to see you again. We've talked many, many times about Hamas, so let me ask you, who do you think is the most likely successor to Haniyeh?
I think the before-mentioned Khalil Hayya could be an interesting contender. He has been involved in the negotiations. He enjoys rather good ties with Qatar, but also with other Arab states. The other person that was mentioned, Khaled Mashaal, of course, is a veteran. He had been at the head of Hamas for about 20 years, I believe. There was an assassination attempt against him by the Mossad in Jordan in 1997. And the Jordanians at that time arrested the Israeli Mossad agents, and they said, we will release them in exchange for the anti-venom. So the Israelis delivered that. And to my knowledge, it's never become 100% clear there was a deal that the Israeli government would not attempt another strike on Khaled Mashaal again. But I don't think if these arrangements are any longer valid. Khaled Mashaal was also chairing Hamas at the time when there was a huge fallout between Hamas and Iran and Syria in light of the Arab Spring and Hamas's involvement with the Muslim Brothers and with some of the revolutionary forces in the Middle East. But these are, of course, like too interesting. To be honest, I don't want to sound cynical, but I think it's the most coveted job at the moment.
The most coveted job?
It's not the most.
It's not the most coveted job, yes. What does all of this mean for the future of Hamas in Gaza? I mean, how do you think Hamas is going to react moving forward?
At the moment, and I think analysts tend to overlook that, Hamas in Gaza is one thing. But there's Hamas ideology, and there's also support and the aspirations of Palestinians and in the West Bank. And that is a powder keg. People in the West Bank are not necessarily pro-Hamas, but they, in the last couple of months, have seen, due to the failure of the Palestinian Authority and due to the constant, let's say, oppression and increase of violence, that Hamas is the only force that somehow is fighting for their cause. Of course, that's somehow a suicidal mindset, but in a way, as long as the war is going on, Hamas ideology is going to be there. Now, the question is, we saw the funeral, images of the funeral of Ismail Haniyeh in Doha. The Qataris, to my knowledge, were ready to expel Hamas from Doha in the framework of a deal. But
a deal that would have included releasing the hostages and...
Exactly, and a ceasefire, end to the war in Gaza. That's not, I cannot, they've never confirmed it to me, but that's what I heard in Doha. The only problem is, of course, if on the other side they see that Israel is eliminating, assassinating every negotiator involved, I mean, also the other people that we hear about here, Khalil al-Hayya, for example, of course, has been targeted, then it's fairly difficult. And now I think the Qataris may change their mind and say, like, look, we were ready, but you don't force us into any decision. For sure, Israel did not attack him in Doha. That is an important thing, and that was also part of let's say, a deal that the Qataris had, to my knowledge, with Israel and with the Americans.
And Israel had vowed since October 7th to kill him.
Sure.
So this wasn't a change in policy.
No, it wasn't a change.
I mean, he was one of the main negotiators, right? He was the point man for the hostage negotiations.
It wasn't changed in policy, and for sure not. I mean, they made it abundantly clear that every Hamas Politburo, political wing, military wing, whatever, is a legitimate target. And beyond that, I mean, about 40,000 people have died in the war in Gaza so far. So the question is, of course, and that's what many Israeli analysts, but also newspapers and demonstrators on the street are asking, are you at all interested, Benjamin Netanyahu, in the release of the hostages? Because if at one point you kill all the negotiators that can speak on behalf of Hamas, and apparently, like, make this ceasefire impossible by of course, like, sabotaging the negotiations, how do you want us to release the hostages? And that is a big problem in the Israeli camp.
Do you think the prospects of releasing the hostages, the prospects of a ceasefire, are both of those prospects now dead?
I mean, not dead, but you hear what President Biden said. I mean, he's usually not very outspoken when he criticizes the Israeli government. He said, like, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh was not helpful. I mean, measured by Biden's own standards, that's quite a statement. Of course, there is huge frustration. On the other hand, what happened in Tehran is, of course, could bring the region to the brink of another war. But on the other hand, what we heard in the last 24 hours could also say, like, point towards de-escalation. Because now there's news, and I think that's false news, but political opportune news, about a bomb being placed
planted there, right?
In Tehran. What does that mean? That means there was a terrorist assassination in the views of the Islamic Republic, but there was no violation of Iranian airspace, no attack on Iran from an outside country. So if that news, I don't think it can be substantiated, but it's a political opportune towards de-escalation because it allows some sort of a face-saving, moderated reaction on the Iranian side.
Daniel, as always, it's good to have you here in the studio. Good to get your analysis. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Let's pick up some of those points with Ali Fathollah-Nejad, who's from the Center for Middle East and Global Order. That's a think tank based here in Berlin. He's also author of Iran in an Emerging New World Order, from Ahmadinejad to Rouhani. Welcome to DW. So who is being talked about as a successor to Ismail Haniyeh as political leader of Hamas there?
I think at this point we don't really know. I mean, the names that you mentioned in your report are part of the discussions, but it's going to be decided within Hamas. But this also may not be the most important factor here, although it's, the top leaders are important. It's not going to change the strategic direction of any of those organizations. While the targeted assassinations of Israel against top commanders of the so-called axis of resistance may instill fear, on the other hand, they're not going to do away and destroy the so-called resistance. So it's more a kind of a network that is at play here throughout the region in the Middle East. So figures alone are not the main story.
Right, you make an interesting point there. So the strategic, the objective remains, destroy Israel. So whoever is picked will just slot into that framework. And so how directly is the Iranian leadership likely to be involved in these discussions within Hamas?
I think Hamas, as opposed to Hezbollah, is a different story because when you look at relations between Iran and Hezbollah, those are much more closer, and they'll go back since the start of the Iranian Revolution, and it's basically the Iranians who created Hezbollah, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, right after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Whereas also what your report suggests that there have been some tensions between Iran and Hamas over the question of how to react to the Arab Spring arriving in Syria, whereas Iran was supporting the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. There was a kind of, estrangement between Iran and Hamas, for quite some time back then. So I believe that when it comes to Hamas, Iran is not going, to be able to call the shots, right. Relatively speaking. If you compare it, for instance, if such a thing would happen within Hezbollah. But then again, also Hezbollah and also Hamas, those are organizations, although they're heavily supported by Iran, they have to be contextualized nationally.
Ismail Haniyeh was involved in ceasefire negotiations over Gaza. What happens to that process while Hamas blames Israel for killing their chief negotiator, and indeed while his successor is still being sought?
Well, for obvious reason, this process that has been ongoing in the Qatari capital of Doha has been, for now at least, de facto torpedoed. So it is going to very much, it's going to be a much more difficult process ahead. It has been a very difficult process up until now. What we heard more lately is that, there have been quite a gulf between the two sides, between the Hamas and the Israel side. So it doesn't bode well, of course, for the continuation of those talks to achieve a ceasefire and also to free the Israeli hostages. So this is, at least for now, a heavy blow to these negotiations. And
just on that point then, do you think that the fact that if we presume that this was an Israeli killing, the fact that that Israel went for this guy, this senior Hamas leader, effectively torpedoing ceasefire and hostages negotiations, does that mean that Israel has put destroying Hamas now above getting the hostages home alive?
Well, it could well mean that, but actually this may have been the case already before, because, it is really questionable whether Israel's military strategy that has been announced from the very beginning of the war has been adequate in achieving the goal of freeing the hostages. As you know, there is tremendous debate within Israel whether, this kind of strategy that is promoted very much by the Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to lead to some results. And as we know, there have been, of course, within this kind of broad-based, non-targeted manner of Israel's military operations, probably there have been, hostages who already have been killed in this process. So, there is a lot of opposition also to this kind of military strategy of Israel by the families of the hostages. So this is quite a strong contradiction that has been in play well before the Haniyeh assassination in Tehran.
Fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it. Ali Fathollah-Nejad from the Centre for Middle East and Global Order. Thank you. Let's pick up some of those points with Barbara Slavin. She's an expert on Iran, as well as being a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Centre in Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. How do you expect Iran and its proxies to avenge Ismail Haniyeh's killing?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think it's pretty clear there will be a strong response. When exactly and how exactly, not clear. Actually, before coming on air, I was just looking at some rather ominous posts on the social media site X from some people close to the Iranian government with pictures of missiles going off. I would think there might be some sort of coordinated response, rocket attacks, drone attacks, not just from Iran, but also from Hezbollah in Lebanon, from the Houthis in Yemen, who have already fired on Tel Aviv. It's a very dangerous moment. If these missiles are not intercepted, if they cause civilian casualties, of course, it could lead to even more escalation on the Israeli side. So it's one of the tensest moments I think we've seen in the last 10 months.
And do you expect a direct response from Iran amongst that, rather than just leaving it to its proxies?
Yeah, very much so. We saw that in April when the Israelis killed 7 Iranian military officers in a diplomatic compound in Damascus. This strike, whether it was a bomb that had been planted or something that came from the air, there are conflicting reports, hit Ismail Haniyeh in a very well-guarded, supposedly, compound in Tehran, a place that's used for VIPs, for dignitaries visiting Iran. So it was quite flagrant and a real violation of Iranian sovereignty. We've also seen the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, threaten revenge for this quite explicitly. So we don't know if it's coming tonight, tomorrow, or a week from now, but I think it's definitely coming.
OK, so this killing of Haniyeh, if it was Israel, you've described it as a violation of Iranian sovereignty. Same words that were used in that April attack on Iranian sovereign territory. And what was said then and what was said now is people were talking about the Iranian response being calibrated. Big enough to prove a point, but not so big that the whole region goes up in flames. Now, you seem to be talking about a strong, coordinated response. This seems to be, that sounds like more than we saw in April.
Yeah, it's possible. The April attacks were telegraphed in advance. Israel and the United States, for example, had advance warning that they were coming and were able to coordinate a response along with other countries in the region. There may not be as much warning this time. The U.S. is already moving some naval assets, other assets around in the Middle East to be in a position to help the Israelis shoot down rockets and missiles if that's indeed what is going to happen. I think, given the fact that it was in Tehran and also that it was on the day of the inauguration of the new Iranian president, that the regime in Iran has to respond strongly, and more strongly than it did in April.
OK, you talked about the US moving its ships in the region around. We've heard from US President Biden saying that Haniyeh's killing doesn't help the Gaza ceasefire talks. We've had countless visits by the US Secretary of State. And I wonder, is it fair to say that US influence on any of the parties in this conflict appears at the moment to be minimal?
Well, clearly, U.S. influence over Bibi Netanyahu is not what we would hope it would be. He has shown complete disregard for the views of the United States. He seems determined to continue this war, to expand this war. He does not seem interested in getting a ceasefire in Gaza. We have to remember that if he stops the war, there may be a move to bring him down in Israel, and he faces charges for corruption. So he has personal and political as well as ideological reasons for prolonging the conflict. Just yesterday, apparently Joe Biden spoke again with Netanyahu and said the United States was very concerned, not just about the strike that killed Haniyeh, but also a strike in the southern suburbs of Beirut that killed a senior Hezbollah leader just a few hours prior to that. These are very provocative steps, and they seem aimed at widening the war, not at containing it. So it's a very dangerous moment. The United States is not happy about this.
OK, thank you for guiding us through that so clearly. I appreciate that a lot of this is speculation, but interesting nonetheless. Barbara Slavin from the Stimson Center in Washington, thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.